It's the summer, so maybe some people think Torah study is out, but that's when we have more time to study Torah, right? Allegedly, maybe not as a rabbi, but other professions. I'm not sure. So we're gonna delve into a little bit into chapter 18. Like I said, it may have to be a little bit short today, but we're gonna start the conversation on chapter 18. Sorry, chapter 19. So we've started this new section of the Tanya, if we recall. The first section of Tanya is all about the first section of Tanya was all about, a lot of hard inner work. And the second section of Tanya is going to be about a life hack. The life hack is, if we started exploring in chapter 18, is we have this hidden love. We described chapter 18 where this hidden love comes from. The hidden love comes from the godly soul that we've been given, that was given to us, this godly soul. And by virtue of that godly soul, we have the ability to connect to God at any time. And that was pretty much chapter 18. Good to see you speak as well. That was pretty much chapter 18. Therefore, we discussed that since that soul is in every Jew, any Jew has the ability to awaken it. It doesn't make a difference how involved they are, how not involved they are. Every Jew has the ability to awaken that godly soul. And Zvika's even got his camera working. Okay. So he's revealing his godly soul. Okay. So we finally ended off discussing that the window to the godly soul is something called chachma, wisdom. Why? Because chachma, wisdom, is what we call objective. Objective means that as opposed to Binah, which is working on something a lot of more ego involved, Chachma is objective, accepting the wisdom. We spoke about the light bulb. When you say, I can't figure it out. And we're going to expand on that idea this week. On this idea that the ultimate revelation of godliness basically is in a place where there's lack of ego. But to be more exact, more than just lack of ego, it's a place where you don't feel you're safe, where you feel yourself at all. That's where we allow God into our lives, in the areas of our life where we feel ourselves less. That's really the ultimate idea. Just to give you an interesting analogy that Hasidic philosophy brings is when someone is sick, you feel the different parts of your body, right? If you feel your toenail, that probably means your toenail is sick. A healthy toenail is when you don't feel it, when you don't feel any part of your body, really, right? Everybody knows we get up, oh, my back, right? That's a sign of something unhealthy. When we don't feel anything, that's the healthiest way that we can be. And the same thing is actually in our godly soul. If we're a part of God, we feel ourselves less. We feel ourselves as we are part of the divine mission, as a part of God, but we're not feeling ourselves. The feeling of self is actually a problem. I was actually reading even in psychology, Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky, as I quote him often, he was writing in his book that people who feel themselves too often is also a sign of illness. If you're always self-aware, again, self-awareness in a psychology is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're always self-aware, in other words, you're always hyper-aware, oh my gosh, what are people thinking about me now? How are people looking at me right now? What are they thinking about what I'm doing? A heightened self-awareness, even in psychology, is considered unhealthy. You can't walk around your whole day. You'd be debilitated thinking about ourselves. So the same thing is in the spiritual world. Thinking about personal interests too often is a problem. So what type of interest should we think about? That is what we're going to discuss, and we're going to give an example of a candle. Everybody here knows that when there's a yard site, we light a candle. Why do we light a candle for a yard site? Anybody? Why are candles depictions of yard sites and memorial boards and all that stuff? Any thoughts? No? Nobody knows why you light a candle? Huh?
For remembrance. Remember.
So why a candle? Why not? I mean, any object.
Because it's lit up.
Because the flame is always going up, reaching towards the heavens.
So, but what does that have to do with the person that passed away?
Well,
Ah, you went mute.
I like a connection,
Huh?
like a connection to that person.
You're saying because the flame is going up, it depicts a connection between you and that
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, Zvika, what do you think?
yeah, what I was saying. I mean, it's ground here at the bottom on Earth, and it's reaching up to the sky to the neshama to where we picture our souls go to Olam Haba, somewhere not here, somewhere north of
You're
here.
saying the candle always flaming up depicts a connection to something higher.
Essentially.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
good. Any other thoughts about why we light a candle for a yard site? It could be multiple reasons, by the way, which it actually is.
Like the brightness of the spirit or the soul.
The brightness of the spirit. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? There's at a very basic level, if anybody has any other basic thoughts? No? All right, so I'll start with this. The most basic thing is over here. This is from Proverbs. It says, man's soul. Actually, the Hebrew actually says, Ner Hashem, the candle of God, is the soul of man. I don't know how they translate this. Man's soul is the Lord's lamp. Okay, they put it backwards. But in essence, the verse is saying that a soul is a candle of God. So we see here clearly that souls are depicted by candles. Hence, from a very basic level, when we commemorate a yard site, we will light a candle because that candle is a depiction of the soul. All right, but that's the verse. The question is, how is the candle a depiction of a soul? Okay, we get it, it says it, but how is it a depiction of the soul? So there's a couple ways of looking at it, and people have touched on it, but we'll expound upon it. Number one is fire is the most spiritual element that we have on this earth. It's tangible, but not tangible, right? Everything else, you can't, you put your hands through things, right? Fire, you can put your hand through it. And, I used to love to play this game with the Hanukkah candles when I was younger and a pyromaniac. That's why I became a rabbi, by the way, so now I coach your people's homes with fire, but, or burn them down. But, if you take a candle, you can put your finger through the fire. The flame is the most spiritual element that we have here on this earth. Okay. It's both there and not there at the same time. That's one reason candles are depictions of a soul. Another reason a candle is a depiction of the soul, that the verse uses that example, is that it's literally the candle is like a soul. Why? You have the body of the candle, the physicality of the candle, right? You have the wax or the oil or whatever it is that burns up, and then you have the fire. And so a candle is basically made up, a lit candle, that is, of course, is made up of two parts. The part that's really alive and the part that's stagnant, that whittles away with time. And the same thing is the body and the soul. The soul is in the body for a certain specific amount of time, as long as the body can hold on to it. And then one day the body falls apart and the soul leaves it. So the candle is a great depiction of the body and the soul. Other people said spreading light, so that's also true. The idea that the soul, the light that we spread in our lives comes from our soul, not our body. That's the flame. The candle itself doesn't give off any light. It's the flame that gives off light. And so similarly, building upon the theme I just spoke about, when we're alive, it's really the soul of us that gives off life. It's not the body, not the candle. So all that's a great reminder on a yard site when we want to connect with our loved ones. We want to remind ourselves that it was their soul that connected with us, and so we're still connected to their soul. The other thing is candles are always chuckling, they're always moving. No, okay, I'm kidding. All right, that's my favorite part of it. So we always move when we study. But anyways, the deeper part is, as Svika was mentioning, and as Beth was mentioning, about the idea of going up. But I want to add on to it. So right, if you take a jug with water and you pour it down, the water goes down, right? Everything in this world goes down. The only thing that doesn't is fire. Fire, no matter what you do with it, if you take a candle upside down, the flame is always trying to go up. So I don't know the physics behind it, but we'll give you the Hasidic meaning behind that. And the Hasidic meaning behind that is that fire is the only thing that wants to cease to exist. No, that sounds weird. It wants to cease to exist. In other words, the Kabbalists talk about where's the flame trying to go? It's trying to go back to its source. It's trying to reconnect with the original source of fire. It's trying to really leave. You're kind of holding it down. It's trying to leave. It's trying to go somewhere. Just to give an example, because you might say, well, where's the source of fire? Just to bother something interesting, I'm sure when space shuttles enter the Earth, there's that great heat, that barrier between the Earth and the atmosphere before it. But I'm not saying that's really the source of the fire necessarily. But if you take a candle and you put it near a big flame, that little flame is going to want to join the bigger flame, right? That's the way it works. You do this all the time with little flames. If you like playing with it, you like to see the flames jump, go from smaller to a bigger candle. Flames are oddly enough seeking a lack of individuality. That's basically the idea. That's the Kabbalistic idea behind flames. Flames are always trying to go up, similar to the idea that I told you about putting a candle to a big light. Is fire is seeking to become subsumed in something greater than it. It is seeking to leave its own individual existence to become part of the greater whole. In the Kabbalists, they say every fire is trying to go up because it's trying to go up back to its source. And that's why you see every little candle trying to join a larger element. The same thing it says is naturally our souls. Our souls here on this earth are like the little candles. They're stuck as individuals. And they're constantly seeking to join back to their source. What is a source? What's the source of a candle? Well, we've discussed many times. Our soul is a piece of God. And the piece of our soul does not like being separate. It does not enjoy this existence where it feels separated from God. Even though when this soul of ours will go back to be more connected to God, it will lose an element of its individuality. That is ultimately what it seeks. And that is the ultimate depiction of the soul. That's what a soul is. A soul is striving for higher. What does striving for higher mean? It is striving to reconnect with its source, which is God. The most important element of what I'm trying to say, if it sounds very Kabbalistic, is that the soul seeks a lack of individuality. It does not seek to make itself greater. It seeks to nullify itself or to become subsumed within the greater God. Okay? So that is what literally means that a godly soul is the candle of man, is that our souls ultimately have a natural desire to seek to be subsumed within God. In fact, we have this about Rabbi Akiva, and everybody here heard of Rabbi Akiva. I don't know if you know how Rabbi Akiva passed away. Rabbi Akiva passed away. One of the Roman generals, or one of the people in Rome, their daughter liked Rabbi Akiva's skin. She said, "Oh, it's beautiful skin. So why don't you save him?" So the general says, "I won't save him. I'll save his skin." So instead of just killing him, they combed off the skin off of his body. Terrible, terrible punishment. And Rabbi Akiva, as the skin was being peeled off of his body, the students were looking at him, and he wasn't crying at all. He was saying the Shema. And his student said, how can you handle it? How can you handle this great pain and talk about the oneness of God at a moment like this? And he told them, my entire life, I've been saying the Shema. And in the Shema, what do we say? With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. With all your soul means, as the commentaries say, even if your soul has to be taken away for God, you love God that much. He said, so I've been saying this passage of the Shema my entire life, even if God takes my life. And I was never sure if I'd be able to fulfill this mitzvah of giving up my life for God. Now that I am, I'm excited. I'm happy. I've been waiting for this moment my entire life. Then it says he finished saying the Shema and he passed away. So, but what do we see from here? Rabbi Akiva, who's the ultimate expression, obviously, of a divine soul, lived that life. Although he was alive here on this earth as an individual, he wasn't interested in, having many students and this and that. That his greatest desire as a soul was to reconnect to God, was to allow his soul the ability to, so to speak, leave the body and reconnect to God. It's an interesting, thing. So that is what a soul ultimately wants, and that is what really holiness is about. Holiness is about as we started talking about last minute, so we give up on ego, give up on separateness, give up on individuality. Now you might say, Rabbi, it's a good question. To further elucidate the idea of the dormant love, clarify the verb Adam's soul, God, this that the souls of it. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but I'm back. Okay, let's go back here. Oh, and I got to spotlight myself. Spotlight. Okay. All right. So, why does a fire always want to go up? So as I explained, because a fire's flame is naturally inclined to detach itself from the wick so as to connect with its root above in the core element of fire, which is below the moon's orbit. So again, it says here technically that the element of fire is below the moon's orbit. I looked it up a couple of years ago, what Kabbalah means that the element of fire is below the moon's orbit. Again, I gave a physical example. There's a great heat when you enter the earth, but it's not important to our conversation, really. The idea, whether science, the idea is true. Candles are trying to escape, and they're trying to go to their element. What exactly means their element is under the moon? It's not important because it's an example of our souls. All right. In the classical model, the universe is divided into two parts: the terrestrial region, which includes the Earth and everything surrounding it, up to the moon's orbit, and the celestial region, which accounts for everything beyond the moon's orbit. Everything in the terrestrial realm is composed of four elements: earth, fire, air, and water. Since rest is the natural state of all terrestrial matter, earth, air, and water tend to seek their natural space at rest in the center of the earth, unless stopped by an impenetrable surface like the ground. But the natural resting place of the element of fire is above us, in the higher part of the terrestrial realm, beneath the moon's orbit. This explains why a flame tends to flicker as it is trying to detach itself from the wick. By nature, it is drawn to its elemental root above the earth. As is stated in Eitz Chaim was by the famed Arizal. He says like this: the classical model was embraced by the sages and was employed extensively by Jewish medieval philosophers. Here, the Tanya notes that this model was also used by Luriana Kabbalah. That's why he's quoted Arizal. And even though by leaving its wick and uniting with its source, the flame would be extinguished and would cease to shine at all down here, and even above, once reabsorbed in its source in the core element of fire, the identity of the flame's light would dissolve in its source. Nevertheless, this is what it is naturally inclined to do. This is what we were explaining before. And as he explains, the flame's tendency is to reunite with its higher source, even though this would result in the physical flame being extinguished. Now, being extinguished could mean it's extinguished down here, and it could mean being subsumed in a larger fire. In fact, even the flame's spiritual identity would be erased as it is reabsorbed in its source in the element of fire. In the same way, a person's higher soul power of teshuvah, as well as the lower soul powers of ruach and nefesh, nefet and neshama, naturally yearn and desire to be separated from the body and to leave it. So it says in a verse, I forget where it says, ruach ha'adam ha'oli lamayla. The spirit of man wants to go up, and the spirit of the animal wants to go down. If what you're gathering here, if what the Tanya basically here is saying, that we are literally born with two opposite desires, two souls that have two very opposite directions. The godly soul wants to go and escape this body, and the animal soul wants to dig down and enjoy more, get deeper in the mud. And they have two totally different objectives of what they would like. And you know what God does? He puts them together, he enmeshes them together and forces them to work together. And ultimately, they both have to do what's against their nature. The animal soul will have to stop being so animalistic and yes, get involved in the world, but in manners that are for godly purposes. And the godly soul as well has to stop trying to leave this world, recognize this godly mission here on this earth. So it's very interesting. We have these two souls, and technically they're actually both going in the wrong direction. And God meshes them and has worked together. So think of it like this. It's kind of like, when you try to balance things out. You pull one way, you pull another way, you got to meet in the middle. I think they call it today in politics bipartisanship, right? No, okay, I'm kidding. That doesn't exist. I don't think it's a word anymore. But let's continue. You know how like in a dictionary they keep adding words. Like every year there's like a new word they add. Soon they're gonna start taking out words. There's gonna be words that are being removed from the dictionary. Anyways, let's continue. So as to attach themselves with the soul's root and source, and God, the giver of life, may he be blessed. Let's read here the practical lesson. Your soul is naturally drawn to God like a flickering flame that yearns to depart from its wick. Now let's finish off this thought, and then we'll open up to some discussion. Even though by departing...
Sorry to interrupt. What page are you on?
What page? We're on page 221 at the bottom.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Even though by departing from the body and being reabsorbed in its source, the soul powers become null and void, and the soul would completely lose its identity there, and nothing would remain of its original character and substance once absorbed in its source. Sounds like long-winded. But what he's saying is, it would become null and void in this world. And even in the world to come, it would lose its identity. It'd be subsumed in God. Nevertheless, this departure from the body towards its source is its natural will and desire. Just as the flame is inclined to leave its wick, or now we're on 222, and be reabsorbed in its source, even though this would result in its identity being erased, and the soul desires likewise. This description of this tendency of the flame and the soul as nature is non-literal, referring to anything which is not product of reasoning and logic. Here he's saying something interesting. The word nature, a lot of people bow down to something called Mother Nature, or the science, or whatever they call it. What is nature really? Nature is really a phenomenon that we can observe. We can maybe explain, but we don't actually know why it does that, right? So science discovers nature, but it doesn't explain why nature does that. That's just what nature does, right? We can dig deeper and deeper why when you freeze water it turns into ice. And so you get deeper explanations. But then people think, oh, wow, so now we've explained water freezing into ice. Oh, look, we're so smart. We're scientists. No, all you've done is you've just broken down the process of what happens in the molecular level of turning water into ice. But it's still a nature set into the world. Who set that nature? God set that nature, right? As Rabbi Emmanuel Shochat of blessed memory used to always say, if there's a law, there's a lawgiver. If there's laws of nature, there's a God that created those laws. Right? There's a law, there's a lawgiver. So there's the laws of nature. Who created the laws of nature? God created the laws of nature. So people love to talk about, it's nature, it's natural, it's we can explain it in science. Again, all science is doing is breaking down at a more micro level what's going on at the macro level, but it's not actually explaining why it happens. Okay, they come up with theories, but it's not actually explaining why it happens. The real reason it happens is because, as we just read here, nature means anything that God created in this world that's not the product of reasoning and logic. It's just how it is. It's just what happens when molecules, get cold and they stop moving, and then they stay in one place and then turns into ice. Anyways, so the desire for your identity to be dissolved in its source is not a rational one. It is an experience to which you are drawn intuitively and naturally. Here, to our reference to the soul's natural will and desire implies the soul's will and desire is not the product of reasoning and logic and graspable, intelligible, rational. Rather, it is transcendent logic and any graspable or intelligible rationale. This is an important point. He has to say that this is natural because, as we're going to describe, that if it's natural, then every person has it. In other words, if this desire to connect to God is born out of logic and reasoning, well, then only holy people, only people who study, only people who pray, only people who are very involved in holiness have this nature embedded within them. The Tanya is saying, no, this nature is embedded within you. Now, why you don't see it is a discussion in the next chapters. But at the end of the day, he's saying soul is like a fire. Soul is like a fire means naturally, he's telling you, naturally your soul desires to connect with God. Your soul wants to connect with God, and there is there's nothing that you can do to change that nature. You can hide it, as we'll discuss in later chapters, but that is what we're discussing here. So this is the natural element of this. Explains, as he says here, we have an answer. What is the defining property of the soul's dormant love? It's an intrinsic, super rational desire for the soul to leave the body. And as he brought proof from previous chapter, and as we're going to bring proof later, this is why we have so many Jews who don't necessarily act very Jewish in their lives, but if you, God forbid, tell them they're not Jewish, or if they're given a choice, the cross or the faith, or all the terrible choices we've been given over the millennia, they choose God, even though they're not very quote unquote religious, because the ultimate nature of their soul is to want to connect to God and not to be disconnected from God. And so when they suddenly feel something that's going to disconnect them from God, their inborn nature of their godly soul acts. That's why you look at these people and you say, that doesn't make any sense. Well, yes, it doesn't make any sense because it's nature. It's natural. It's the nature of their soul to want to connect to God. The fact that you don't see it all the time, that's unnatural. That's their unnatural state of being. That's them being able to hide their natural state of being. When their nature comes out, that makes sense. It's like they tell the story. I shared it before. I don't know, it's a legend. It's a real story that Maimonides had this debate with some of the other ministers in the Sultan's palace. Can you train a cat? And the Maimonides says at the end of the day, a cat is a cat. It's got an inborn animal nature. You can't fully ever train it. The other one says no, we can. And so they made a feast. And they trained the cat to be a waiter. The cat was going to be the waiter for the feast. And all the ministers are sitting there, and the cat's bringing in the food in and out, in and out. And Maimonides is sitting there, and they start looking at Maimonides. Aha, you see, look what we've done. And as the cat is bringing the food, Maimonides pulls out of his pocket a little box. He opens it up. Out comes the mouse, and the cat drops all the food and runs after the mouse. So you could train the cat, and it'll do whatever it can do for a certain amount. It's like you could train a dog not to bite a rabbi, but it's against their nature, the nature of dog. Okay, I'm kidding. The nature of the cat came out that ultimately it's got primal instincts to chase mice, and you can train it and cover it up and pretend it's not an animal, but it is an animal. And the same thing is he's telling us is our godly soul is it naturally wants to connect with God. And anything that doesn't look like that, it's because our nature is being hidden, but our nature can be revealed at any time. Now he's going to, any questions or comments? No? No questions or comments, okay. Now he's going to take this idea, but you have to go, right? Yeah, you sure? Okay. 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 Now he's going to take this idea that the godly soul's natural desire is to be not itself, to be subsumed in God, as a general rule in what makes something holy and godly. So let's read this, because this, to me, like I say, there's always, every week there's a general thing that Tanya is trying to build towards, and here he's trying to build towards this second paradigm. The second paradigm of the Tanya is you have an inborn love for God, and if you can tap into it, you can do the right thing. You can skip, so to speak, the steps of deep meditation. So that's why we're talking about this deep godly soul. But every Tanya class will also have a particular lesson that we can take away. So here's going to be the particular lesson. Actually, I have to read 3 more lines, then we get to the particular lesson. But we'll have a particular lesson that we could take away today of how to change our lives today. So here he just explains, if souls are naturally drawn to God, why doesn't everybody believe in him? In the following section, Tanya will explain that certain conditions need to be met for the soul's properties to be available and manifest. As he mentioned in chapter 18, the root of the soul's super-rational intuition and faith is the component of Chachma, which is the blessed infinite light of God found in it. The soul is drawn powerfully to its source because the soul's Chachma within it. Chachma acts as a window. And of course, if you're hiding your window, then you'll have trouble. Anyways, I don't want to go back because we discussed that at length last week. Okay. Let us read this section. And this is what I'm saying. This is a fundamental principle that we need to take for ourselves. The following is a fundamental principle with all the forces of holiness. Okay? To understand how to make yourself a container for the blessed infinite light, which enters your soul through its window of Chachma, we first need to learn a fundamental principle. The fundamental principle is the forces of holiness are exclusively derived from Chachma. Chachma is not merely a route to holiness, it is the route to holiness. Everything in the universe that is sacred must flow through Chachma. We spoke about Chachma at length last week. As we find that Chachma itself is actually referred to as supernal holiness in the Zohar, since it is the root of everything holy. And we explained why is Chachma the root of everything holy. So he continues, and as we have explained, that is because Chachma's own identity is voided by the blessed infinite light present within it, so that it doesn't feel itself to be an independent thing from God, as explained above, right? So as we explained last time, we said, what is Chachma? What is wisdom? Wisdom is, we gave the example when you're studying and you can't figure anything out, and then you finally say, I give up, and then the idea pops into your mind. So Chachma is a lack of self, lack of identity. Chachma is that window, the objectiveness, which doesn't exist in this world, right? But this is what Chachma is. Chachma is the window to God. Why? Because it's a voided identity. There's no identity there. And as we explained, that's why Chachma is called Koach Ma, the power of what? What means I don't know. It's an emptiness of the ego, as he says. An inquisitive and openness to the unknown. The tendency to openness comes when you empty the ego. Because the ego is always sure of itself, right? People who have an ego, they know everything. They don't ever wonder. They don't ever have questions. They know it all. Have you ever heard the word know-it-all? It's because they don't have chokhmah. Having defined holiness as voiding of identity and ego and an openness to something higher than self, it follows the counterforce of holiness, klipa, is defined by the reverse. This is the complete opposite of klipa and sitra achra, which produces the souls of the nations of the world who are self-serving. Obviously, that doesn't refer to the righteous of the world, but people who are self-serving, they could do, the point is someone can do very good things, but if it's self-serving, it's not holy. Let's give an example. Let's give a politician. A politician may help you, but it could be 100% self-serving, and as such, it wouldn't be holy. Okay? That's why the Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, warns us, don't get too connected to the government. You know, it's the Mishnah says they only help people for themselves. That's basically what the Mishnah says. That's what it's saying. You can have people who are self-serving. Oh, wow. So we see this now with the world. You know, once the world When the world thinks it needs Israel, it takes Israel aside. When it doesn't need Israel, it doesn't take it. It's always the same story. Self-serving. All right. The tendency of Klippa is to say, give me, give me. As Esau said to Jacob, feed me, right? What did Jacob say when he showed up into the house? I want, right? You ever heard the word I want? It's the, what's amazing is how the world has found words that really depict what people want. What's the most famous phone? The iPhone, right? Everything today is my iPhone, me, iPhone. I got my iPhone, I got my iPad, I got my this, I got my that. Everything's about the it's about me. Feed me, give me. I need the latest. I want the best. I want the greatest. The world is a world of a self-serving world. And let's continue. That's what Jacob is. Sorry, Esau. Esau is, and we'll turn to page 224. This self-serving mentality is caused by the feeling of ego and separateness from God, as stated above. The opposite of Chochmah's character, right? So Esau, for example, he was hungry. He wanted soup. He wasn't thinking about the future, about serving God. Why would he care to be Jacob? Jacob is a person that has to serve God, right? Again, Esau sold the birthright for soup. Why? Because he was the ultimate consumer. For him to be Jacob would mean to be someone who has to serve the world. He's not interested in that. Esau is not interested in serving the world. Esau is interested in serving himself. So when given the opportunity, soup or serving, he'll take the soup, right? It was an easy decision for him. He only complained about it later because he wanted the benefits of it. He wants all the benefits without the work. That's why he complains. But ultimately, he didn't care about serving. He cared about himself. He was the ultimate ego. So, let's continue. Therefore, the forces of Klippa are referred to as dead because Chochmah gives life, and the verse states they die without Chochmah. Let's read what he explains here. Life is a result of interconnectedness. You are only alive because your organs and limbs work together in wondrous unity. If your arm, for example, loses blood supply and nervous connection, the rest of the body, it would die. In a broader sense, something is only alive if it connects with God. Klippa and all that it embodies is an energy of ego, fragmentation, disconnectedness. Therefore, it is compared to death. There's before we get to the wicked people who can sometimes show their true colors, which is a good thing. We tend to split up the world between good and bad. That's one way of looking at the world, right? There's either good things or bad things, good actions or bad actions. And so in the world, if you do something good, even if it's ungodly, right? Let's say it's for personal gain, personal whatever it is, in the world we'll call it good. Kabbalah adds a different twist to this. Kabbalah says it's not about good and bad. It's about holy versus unholy. It's about godly versus ungodly. And therefore, and we had these discussions in chapter 7, I think, and 6 and 7 as well. Therefore, this is what the Tanya is coming and telling you. If you want God in your life, you have to create that window. That the lack of ego is what allows God into your life. That's why chokhmah, wisdom, where you give up, that's the window to godliness. That's why a godly soul, the essence of it, is something that doesn't seek a personal and self-identity. So the world in this paradigm is split up into godly and ungodly. And what defines something as godly is lack of ego, lack of self-desire and self-propping and self-this and self-that. Just to give you a story, there was a student. His name was Eliezer, the lame one, because he was a student of the first Chabad Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, the one who wrote the Tanya, and he traveled from Israel to Russia to study by the Alter Rebbe. And when he went on his way, he hurt himself, so he became lame. So that was his name. Anyways, they once asked him. They said, "You were a great scholar before you came to the Alter Rebbe. Before you came to the Baal Tanya, you were a great scholar. So, what he says, what did you gain by coming to the Alter Rebbe? So he told them, he says, before I studied Hasidic philosophy, I knew about my greatness. I knew about what's special about me. And I always asked the question, my question always was, will God ever be able to create a large enough reward for me? I'm so great. I'm so good. You think God can really create a place that's great enough for all the things that I've done? He says, now that I've studied Hasidic philosophy, I have a totally different question. My question is, how is God able to handle a person like me? How does God handle a big egomaniac like me? How does God handle such a lowly person like me? Uh, um, so it all depends on where our starting point is. Do we start with our greatness or do we start with God's greatness? That's the difference between holiness and unholiness. Unholiness starts with I'm great. What can God do for me? And unholiness, that's unholiness. And holiness starts, God's great. How do I fit into his picture? Is really the question to ask. And this answers a question that I alluded to earlier. This is a question many people deal with when they study Hasidic philosophy and they study this idea and they want to know, Rabbi, this sounds very depressing. Until now, I've thought I can reach something, I can become something. I have a goal. I'm going to become a greater Jew, a greater Yid, a greater this, a greater that. I've got a goal in life. I can become something better. Now you're telling me I should seek to become a nothing. I should subsume my identity into a greater identity. So where is there a place for me to do anything? Right? If I don't have an identity, then what am I what am I here for? I mean, if I'm just trying to become a nothing, then that doesn't excite me. It doesn't excite me. So the truth is, the answer is it's actually a liberating idea. And I'll give you an example. From Chabad Shluchim, Chabad emissaries. You can look at it in two ways as an emissary, and we call it an emissary. You can look at it as I've gone out to a place and I'm trying to accomplish X, Y, and Z, and there's 30,000 Jews in Pinellas County, and I'm trying to bring them back to Torah and Judaism and bring them back to God. And then your happiness is dependent upon your level of success. And as we know, success is dependent on the day, and some days are good, some days are bad. And lots of people in life don't ever experience the success that they imagined they wanted to get to, right? Most of us have high expectations that don't get there. And so if we're always about ourselves, if we're trying to pump up our identity, there is going to be a lot of people out there who are going to be unhappy. No, sure, there's going to be some people who are going to reach somewhere and are going to be happy, but there's a large amount of people who are going to end up unhappy. I'm not just hyperbole over here. I speak to a lot of people. I know a lot of people are unhappy. They're wondering, where have I gotten to in life? I'm still 65, and I was speaking to someone yesterday. I'm still 65, and I'm still working, and I change jobs every 3 years and whatever. And I didn't think I'd be here, whatever. It can be a place of a great sore. It could be a great sore point. Or let's go back to being a Chabad Shliach, where you say, I am here as part of a greater mission, and it's not about me. And so every single day, I am trying. That's why the word Shliach means you're an emissary. It's not you. You're an emissary for this larger and greater mission. The less you think about yourself, actually, the happier you become. You actually become part of something greater than you, right? In other words, if I'm, for example, going back to myself, if I'm focusing on how great I can get, I can only be as great as I can be. There's a limit to that. But if I try to focus on how I can be part of godliness, there's nothing greater than God. I have, so to speak, attached myself to something greater than me. That's why, by the way, you see today in the world, this is one of the reasons why we have all these college protests going on. Since we've removed God from the equation, we've removed God from the campuses and the education and the teachings, people are trying to find ways to make themselves greater, to be part of something greater. So now, oh, I'm part of this movement that's going to stop genocide. Wow, I'm so great now, right? In other words, they don't feel worth, they don't feel a worth in their own being as an individual, because again, they feel that greatness can only come from how far they can get. They've only gotten so far in life. They're college students living in their parents' basement with thousands of dollars in college debt, or whatever it is. Maybe in Harvard, it's even more thousands of college debt, whatever it is. There's only so much greatness you can get on your own. And so we see this happening in the world. People who don't have God are trying to find meaning, purpose, identity by becoming part of something larger. It's actually built in the nature of the human being. So what we're presenting here in the Tanya is actually what we see in nature, what we see people doing is yes, there's an element of what you can do, what you can accomplish. But what's greater than that is when you can become of something greater than yourself. That's what the Tanya is telling us. So that's why I say when I read this Tanya and I see your lack of identity, becoming part of God is actually the ultimate way to happiness. Because when you look at yourself as a part of God, a part of his mission, you've now attached yourself to something greater than yourself, greater than you can ever be, greater than your own little small contribution. You are a part of greatness, and there's nothing greater than God. So that is the way I look at this idea. Any thoughts? If anybody has anything they want to share? No? Okay. Yeah, Beth?
Yeah, that's a very wow. That's quite an interesting take on that. It's like with terrorist groups, you could say the same thing, that they don't have anything else in their lives to go to. So that makes them feel powerful,
Yeah,
to belong to such horrendous stuff.
it's true. Yeah, I mean, like I said, people use this idea is used in the negative. We're obviously presenting it in the positive way. I guess what I'm ultimately saying is that everybody will eventually get there. Everybody's going to eventually try to be part of something greater than themselves. Aside from select individuals, most people are going to try to, become something greater than their own individual worth, right? Right. Even rich people, they don't usually suffice with being rich. They try to get involved in multiple things. They want to be known as the game kid, whatever. You know what I mean? So it's the nature of the person. I think it's the nature of the person is at the end of the day. I think what it is it's like this. By virtue of our soul, we will always feel empty. That's really what it is. We feel empty and devoid of meaning as long as we are just seeking self-gratification and pleasure. So just like when you're hungry, you can fill it with junk food. You can try to fill that hole of meaning with all different manners. Some people go the direction of indulging more. There's a whole bunch of people, by the way, that are not trying to become something greater. There's a whole bunch of people that are trying to indulge more, right? There are people that aren't even protesting. We call them the people don't care about anything, right? They're just seeking indulgement and pleasure. There are people that try that too. The ultimate common denominator, I think, between all these people is ultimately they'll always feel empty. It's sugar carbs. There's only only the true happiness, a connection with God, will lead a person to true happiness. Everything else will always leave someone feeling empty at the end of the day. We have now a lot of Jews who for years were trying to we're accepting of everybody, and we're this and we're that. And then suddenly they find that after October 7th that all these friends that they made throughout all these years don't care about them. They care, but they don't really care about us. Anyways, so that's I think that's what we're seeing. I think that's the idea. I think we'll leave the next part for next week. The next part, it talks about what? Hello? No, I think we'll leave the next part for next week. The next part we'll talk about how.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
You had mentioned before the animal soul is, you said, centering on the physicality and kind of coming down, while the neshama is always trying to reach up and become part of something greater, something, be
Yeah.
part of God. So I'm questioning the paradox of these two important parts of our being that essentially, like you said, they're one's going north, one's coming south, so they're meant to crash into each other. Um, and I think maybe that's what gives a lot of people daily strife and uncomfortableness and maybe mental illness. I don't know that we can answer this question here today, but why would Hashem sort of set us on this course of strife as opposed to, okay, your job here is to make the world into a godly place. So leave it at that. So now we can strive to be better and be part of something bigger. But why add the animal soul's desire, which contradicts everything that the neshama wants to do?
Well, what I added today is that we tend to think the godly soul really just wants to do mitzvahs. And what I presented here today is actually naturally the animal soul, the godly soul doesn't want to do mitzvahs. It wants to actually leave your body. The second best is to do mitzvahs. That's what I was adding here. And so the
You're
ultimate,
saying leave the body as in die?
yeah, your godly soul naturally hates this world. It's nature. I'm talking about nature. Its nature does not like this world. The Mishnah says, Bal korchacha tachai, against your will, you're alive. We're told the godly soul generally does not want to come down to the body. It's not so interested. You know, we tell it if you go down, you can do mitzvahs, you can do good things, but it's not in its natural desire to come down here. You can convince it, but it's not its natural. Naturally wants to stay with God. Why would it want to bother coming down here? Just stick with God.
So my point is even greater than
Correct.
why set us on this crash course of disaster?
Yeah, because
I mean, does he, that's God's sense of humor? Or, I mean, come on.
yeah, I mean, he wants us to prove it. Again, God could have had a world full of angels, but he wanted people who have two opposite natures, and he wants that both the godly soul and the animal soul should go against their nature to do the will of God. That's the ultimate trick. That's, so to speak, the ultimate trick that God wants to see is that things that are not naturally doing the will of God should do the will of God. That's what we're doing the whole world, right? We're taking things that are physical by nature and turning them into some spiritual thing, meaning connected to the will of God. And the same thing is our lives, that we should, both our godly soul and animal soul should be subservient to his will. That's his desire. God wants a home on this earth. What does a home on this earth means? What's different about this earth than other earths? This earth is a place which is naturally anything but the will of God. It's the will of self, is nature. You know, you can't send, just to end off talking about the godly soul that doesn't want to stay in this earth. You know, they say, just to end off with a thought, they say you don't want the leader who wants to be the leader, right? That's one of our problems today, right? All the leaders are people who want to be presidents. You want the person who doesn't want to be the leader to be the leader. For example, all the Chabad Rebbes did not want to be Rebbe. Even our Rebbe did not want to be Rebbe. They had to convince him and cajole him and this and that and force him into it. He didn't want to be it. A real leader is someone who has, so to speak, the nature to be a leader, but doesn't actually want it. A real leader is someone who's of a higher caliber, would love to live in a higher sphere, has the ability to lead, but is not interested in that, you know, and those are going to be the greatest leaders. The people who want to be the people who generally have the desire to be the leaders are the people who are generally people full of ego. So a naturally pious, godly individual just wants to be spiritual. That's the nature of a pious spiritual life. And it is the will of God that makes all these pious people connect with the world. Even the Baal Shem Tov, many people don't know. He wasn't always a public figure. When he turned 36, his Rebbe came to him and told him, now it's time to go out to the world. But until then, he was hidden. He was a hidden tzaddik serving God hidden in his own way, and he was happy. But eventually, it was time for him to bring his talents to the world. And, if we want to say that in our own lives, there are times when we should foster our natural connection with God. We need to sit down and study just personally for ourselves, not to teach. And then there are times when we take what we learn and bring it out to the world. We need to have both of those elements. We need to work on our natural spirituality, and then we could take that spirituality and bring it to the world, because that's the will of God. I know it's not a full answer. It's just the beginning of the discussion. But it's like you said, who says there is an answer? This is what God wants. It's ultimately the answer. The ultimate answer is that's what God wants. He wants it to be difficult. If it was easy, then there's nothing exciting about it. If it was, if there was no difficulty in doing what he wants us to do, then there's no excitement and there's no desire there. It's just another spiritual world that he creates. Right? Yeah, so that's the story. So yeah, he sets us up for a collision course, 100%. So anybody who's not expecting a collision is in for a rare treat. So we'll have to end it there, or at least the recording. I can stick around. I'm just gonna stop the recording.